I spent my entire life savings on a dream vacation for my family. But at the airport, my own son looked me in the eye and said, "You're not coming." That single sentence shattered me. After years of sacrificing, working overtime, and skipping my own needs, I thought I was finally giving my family the ultimate gift, a trip to Hawaii, something I had been saving for over a decade. But instead of gratitude, instead of joy, what I received was betrayal. You see, I wasn't a rich man. I grew up in a working-class home where new clothes were a luxury and restaurant dinners were rare. I learned responsibility early. My father left when I was just a boy, and my mother struggled to raise me and my siblings. I swore when I became a father, I would never let my children feel the kind of instability I felt growing up. That promise turned into a lifetime of sacrifice. I took every shift available. Warehouse work during the day, night shifts as a security guard, weekend jobs doing construction. My hands were blistered more times than I could count. I gave up vacations, nights out, and hobbies just so I could keep saving. And slowly, steadily, I built a dream fund. The dream? Hawaii. Ever since I was young, I had seen those glossy travel magazines with turquoise waters and white beaches. I told myself, one day, I'll stand there with my family. One day we'll laugh together in the sun, far away from bills and work. So, I started saving in a jar first, then in a small account. Every birthday gift I received, every spare dollar from overtime, every tax refund, it all went straight into the Hawaii fund. People laughed at me sometimes. "You're never going to get there," they'd say. "Life has a way of eating up savings." And they weren't wrong. Emergencies came, bills piled up, but I refused to touch that account. That was my dream, my promise. Years passed, my children grew. My wife often suggested using the money for home renovations, a new car, or college tuition, but I always shook my head. "This is for us," I'd say. "For once in our lives, we'll experience something unforgettable together." Finally, after more than a decade, I had saved $40,000, enough for first-class flights, a luxury resort, and every activity you could imagine. Snorkeling, luau's, helicopter rides. I didn't want my family to just visit Hawaii. I wanted them to feel like royalty. When I announced it, the reactions were priceless. My daughter screamed and hugged me, jumping around with excitement. My wife teared up, whispering that she couldn't believe I'd pulled it off. Even my son, aloof, phone-obsessed, often distant, cracked a small smile. I thought finally this would bring us closer again. We started planning immediately. Shopping for swimsuits, buying luggage, watching videos about Maui. Every night we'd sit together, imagining the adventures ahead. I thought it was perfect. I thought this was what family was all about. But underneath, something was brewing. Something I didn't see. Something that would turn my dream into a nightmare. As the departure date crept closer, my excitement grew to the point where I could barely sleep. Every night I would double-check the itinerary, print backup copies of the tickets, and even rehearse how smoothly we'd get through security. My wife teased me for being overprepared, but deep down she loved seeing me so happy. It wasn't often I got to play the hero, but this trip made me feel like one. My daughter, who was still in high school, decorated her room with palm tree posters and taped a countdown calendar to her wall. Every morning she'd scratch off, another day, squealing, "Only 10 days left, only 5. Her energy was contagious and it fueled me. But my son was different. At 17, he had grown cold, detached, almost arrogant. He spent most of his time glued to his phone, messaging friends and laughing at things I didn't understand. Whenever we talked about Hawaii, he shrugged. "Yeah, it'll be fun," he said without enthusiasm. I brushed it off as typical teenage behavior. He'd come around when he saw the beaches, I told myself. Still, his lack of interest gnawed at me. Why didn't he care? Didn't he understand how much this meant? I had built this trip on the foundation of my life's work, and yet he acted like it was just another boring family outing. The night before we left, I stayed up late. After everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the travel folder I had put together. Passports, tickets, hotel confirmations, excursion vouchers, it was all there. I ran my hands over the papers and smiled. imagining the look on their faces when they finally saw Hawaii with their own eyes. I whispered to myself, "It's finally happening. We made it." Morning came quickly. The alarm blared at 4 a.m., and I jumped out of bed, filled with energy I hadn't felt in years. My wife groaned, but even she smiled when she saw me bustling around like an excited child. We packed the car with our luggage, locked the house, and set off for the airport. The drive was full of chatter. My daughter played Hawaiian music from her phone, singing along in broken Hawaiian. My wife laughed and promised to try surfing once. We got there. I held the steering wheel with both hands, my heart racing with pride. Everything felt perfect, everything except my son. He sat in the back seat with headphones in, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging us. I told myself to ignore it. Today was too important to let his mood ruin it. When we pulled up to the airport, my chest swelled with pride. The huge glass building, the bustling travelers, the scent of fresh coffee and fuel, it was all part of the adventure. We unloaded the bags, checked the time, and headed inside. Standing in line at the check-in counter, I clutched the folder with our tickets. My daughter clung to my arm, bouncing with excitement. My wife smiled at me, her eyes shining. Even my son finally removed his headphones, though his expression was unreadable. At the counter, I handed over the documents with a broad smile. The clerk scanned them one by one. Beep, beep, beep. Then, silence. She frowned at her screen. "That's strange," she murmured. "It seems we only have 3 tickets here." I chuckled nervously. "No, there must be some mistake. I booked 4 tickets, 1 for each of us." She tapped at the keyboard, double-checked, and then looked up with sympathy. "I'm sorry, sir. This reservation only has 3 confirmed passengers. Your name isn't on the list." The world tilted. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My wife stared at me in confusion. My daughter's excitement turned into a frown. My son shifted uncomfortably beside us. I swallowed hard. That can't be right. I paid for 4. I saved for this for years. But the clerk only shook her head. "I understand, sir, but according to this, there are only 3 seats booked. Someone must have changed the reservation." My eyes flicked to my son, calm, expressionless, avoiding my gaze. My heart sank. Something was very, very wrong. My stomach dropped. My wife leaned closer to the counter, her voice sharp. "There must be some mistake. We booked 4 tickets. I remember seeing them." The clerk shook her head apologetically. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. There are only 3 confirmed. If you'd like, you can purchase another ticket now, but the price will be significantly higher since the flight is almost full." I felt the blood drain from my face. Another ticket? After I had already paid for everything? I pulled the folder closer, flipping through the documents. They looked official, stamped and correct, but when I searched carefully, I realized something horrifying. My name truly wasn't there. The 3 tickets had my wife's name. My daughter's and my son's. Mine was missing. My wife turned to me, panic rising in her voice. "How could this happen? Did you forget your own ticket?" I shook my head firmly. "No, I bought them all together. I checked 100 times. This isn't a mistake on my end." That's when I saw it. The small change in my son's expression. His lips pressed tight, his eyes darting away. A cold suspicion crept into my mind, one I didn't want to believe. "Son," I said slowly, my voice shaking. "Do you know anything about this?" He didn't answer immediately. My wife and daughter stared at him, waiting. Finally, he shrugged. I thought it would be better this way." "Better?" My voice cracked. "What do you mean?" "Better. I spent my entire life savings for this trip." He finally looked at me, his face calm in a way that chilled me to the bone. "Dad, you work all the time. You don't get vacations. You wouldn't even enjoy Hawaii. You'd be tired, or complaining or stressing, so I figured it was smarter if you stayed home and let us enjoy it." The words stabbed me like knives. My own son had deliberately cut me out of my dream. My chest tightened as my daughter gasped in horror. My wife's face turned pale, disbelief written all over her. You cancelled my ticket?" I whispered. He shrugged again as if it were nothing. "Not cancelled, I just adjusted the reservation. You can stay home, relax. We'll bring you back souvenirs. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The noise of the airport blurred around me. Announcements echoed overhead, people rushed past, luggage wheels rattled on the floor, but all I could hear were his words. "You're not coming." The clerk at the counter looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. "Sir, do you want me to see if there are any seats left? I can check, but I can't promise anything." I couldn't answer. My hands trembled as I clutched the folder. My wife grabbed my arm, whispering urgently, "We'll fix this, don't worry. We'll figure it out." But deep down, something inside me was breaking. I had sacrificed everything, my time, my health, my dreams, just for them. And now my own son had stolen the one thing I wanted most. I looked at him again. No guilt, no shame, just indifference. That's when the first ember of rage sparked in my chest. The silence between us felt louder than the airport itself. My daughter's eyes welled with tears, and she grabbed my hand tightly. "Daddy, no, you have to come with us. This was your dream." Her small voice cut through the noise, but my son only sighed, clearly annoyed. "Look, it's not a big deal," he said coldly. "You'll just slow us down. We want to have fun, not babysit you." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Babysit me? Was that how he saw me? As a burden? As dead weight? My chest ached, but I forced myself to stay calm. My wife turned on him, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you say that to your father? Do you have any idea what he's done for this family?" My son rolled his eyes, muttering, Yeah, we know. He works hard. He sacrifices. We've heard it all before." It was like a knife twisting deeper. My sacrifices, decades of missed. Birthdays, sleepless nights, and worn-out bones, dismissed in a single sentence. I wanted to scream, to demand how he could betray me like this, but the words caught in my throat. The clerk cleared her throat gently. "Sir, I checked. There is one seat left on the flight, but it's in economy and the cost is over $3,000. Would you like to purchase it?" $3,000, after I had already drained my savings, after I had poured every cent into this trip. My mind raced. Should I pay it? Should I beg, borrow, or charge it to a car just to be with them? But then my son spoke again, sealing the wound. "Don't waste the money, Dad. Just let us go. We'll FaceTime you from the beach." My wife gasped. My daughter started crying openly. "And me?" I stood frozen, numb, as though the ground had disappeared beneath me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, I was being erased by my own blood. I turned toward the glass windows of the terminal, staring at the planes taking off into the sky. Families hugged, children laughed, couples kissed before boarding. For them, the airport was a place of joy and beginnings. For me, it had become a place of betrayal. And yet, beneath the pain, something else was stirring. Something I hadn't felt in years. A dark, cold determination. My son thought he had outsmarted me, that he could steal my dream and leave me behind. But what he didn't know was that betrayal can change a man. Betrayal can turn love into something else. Something sharp. Something dangerous. I clenched my fists, forcing back the tears. This wasn't the end of my story. No, this was only the beginning. Because if my son wanted to treat me like I was nothing, he was about to learn just how much of a mistake that truly was. I stood there in the middle of the airport, numb as if the life had been drained out of me. My daughter clung to my arm, my wife whispered frantically in my ear, and my son simply scrolled back to his phone, like none of this even mattered. The betrayal burned hotter with every passing second. My mind kept repeating the same words. I saved for years. I built this dream. I sacrificed everything. And now I'm being cut out of it like I never mattered at all. My wife turned to me, her voice low but fierce. "We're not going without you. Do you hear me? If you're not on that plane, none of us are." I wanted to believe her, but my eyes flicked toward my son. He didn't look panicked or upset or even guilty. Instead, there was a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, as if this was all part of some plan. Why? Why would he do this to me? The clerk cleared her throat. "Sir, if you don't make a decision soon, the remaining seat will be gone. I can't hold it." I opened my wallet, fingers trembling, staring at my credit card. $3,000. I had nothing left. Every cent had gone into this trip. Even if I bought the seat, I'd have no money for food, excursions, or emergencies. And more than that, the thought of sitting cramped in economy while my family enjoyed first class, laughing without me, the humiliation was unbearable. My daughter tugged my arm. "Daddy, please, we can't go without you. It won't be the same." Her words pierced my heart, but my son's cold response drowned them out. "She'll get over it," he muttered, barely looking up. It's not like he was going to surf or snorkel anyway. He'd just slow us down. The audacity in his tone made my blood boil. My fists clenched at my sides, and for a moment I actually imagined grabbing him by the shoulders and demanding an explanation. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. In, out, calm. I couldn't explode here. Not in front of strangers. Not in the middle of an airport. My wife stepped between us, her voice trembling with rage. "Do you realize what you've done? This man, your father, has given everything for you, and you humiliated him in front of everyone." My son shrugged, his face full of teenage arrogance. "Whatever. You'll thank me later. Now you can actually relax on a beach instead of worrying about him the whole time." That was it. That was the moment the seed of something darker took root inside me. I looked at him, not as my son, not as the boy I had raised, not as the child I had once carried on my shoulders, but as a stranger. A selfish, ungrateful stranger who had robbed me of the one dream I had left. And in that instant I made a silent promise this would not be forgotten. The minutes dragged on like hours. Around us, families moved forward with their boarding passes, laughing, hugging, ready to make memories. For them, the airport was just the start of something beautiful. For me, it had turned into a stage for betrayal. The clerk's voice finally cut through the tension. "Sir, I have to close the option for that last ticket if you don't want it." I looked at her blankly, then back at my wife. She nodded, urging me, but I slowly shook my head. "No," I whispered. "Not like this." Her face fell. My daughter began to cry again, burying her face into her hands. My son, meanwhile, exhaled in relief like a weight had been lifted. That tiny smirk returned to his lips, and my stomach twisted with disgust. I stepped away from the counter, dragging our bags to the side. My wife followed, her voice rising with anger. "Are you proud of yourself?" she snapped at him. "You've ruined everything." But he didn't look ashamed. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. "You don't get it. He doesn't belong on this trip. Hawaii isn't for people like him. It's for people who want to enjoy life, not someone who complains about money every second. He's boring. He's old. He's just done." Each word felt like a blade twisting deeper. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. My son wanted me out. He wanted me erased. I remembered the nights I spent working double shifts so he could have new sneakers. The mornings I left early, skipping breakfast so he could have lunch money. The hours I stood in freezing cold warehouses, my back aching, my feet blistered. Also, he could grow up comfortable. And this was my reward? To be cast aside like an inconvenience? My wife grabbed his arm. "You apologize right now, do you hear me? You apologize to your father." But he pulled away, defiant. "For what? For telling the truth? He doesn't fit. He'll drag us down. This is for the best." The best. That phrase echoed in my skull. How could he possibly think this was for the best? How twisted had his mind become that betraying his own father was a solution? I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the boy I had once known. But there was nothing. Just cold arrogance. And for the first time in my life I realized something terrifying. Maybe I didn't know my son at all. Maybe the boy I had raised had been replaced by someone else. Someone cruel, selfish, and unrecognizable. My wife turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because the answer forming in my mind was too dark, too dangerous to speak out loud. This wasn't the end of the trip. No. This was the beginning of something else entirely. We sat on a row of stiff airport chairs, the kind that dig into your back and make every minute feel like an hour. My daughter leaned against me, still crying softly. My wife paced back and forth, muttering under her breath, trying to calm herself down, and my son, he just sat there, arms crossed, eyes glued to his phone as though nothing had happened. I studied him in silence. The glow from his screen reflected off his face, calm and careless. It was almost surreal. How could he act so normal after gutting me so deeply, after tearing apart the one dream I had built for decades? Flashbacks crashed through my mind like waves. The time I stayed up all night fixing his bike because he wanted to ride it the next morning. The time I skipped my own meals so he could have seconds at dinner. The birthday where I worked a 14-hour shift just to afford the game console he begged for. Each memory cut deeper, fueling the fire growing in my chest. I thought this trip would heal the distance between us. I thought Hawaii would bring us closer, make us a family again. But instead it had revealed the truth, that my son didn't see me as a father, or even as a man. To him, I was just an obstacle. Finally, I broke the silence. My voice was low, almost too calm. "Why, son, why would you do this?" He didn't look up from his phone. "I told you, it's better this way. You'd hate it there anyway. You don't fit in with us anymore." The words hit me harder than any fist could. "You don't fit in with us anymore." My own son had drawn a line, us and you, my wife snapped. "Stop it! Do you even hear yourself? That's your father." He shrugged, finally meeting my eyes, and that look, it wasn't guilt or regret or even anger. It was pity, like he was the adult and I was some clueless old man who didn't understand. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I leaned forward, staring at him, my voice shaking but firm. "One day, you're going to regret this. One day, you'll understand what it feels like to give everything to someone and get nothing back. And when that day comes, you'll remember what you did to me." For a flicker of a second, his smirk faltered. Just for a moment. But then he scoffed, looked away and muttered, "Whatever." That was enough. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, but my mind was racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because betrayal has a way of planting seeds. Seeds that grow into something darker, stronger. And as I sat there, surrounded by strangers, humiliated and heartbroken, I felt those seeds begin to take root. This wasn't just about a trip anymore. This was about respect, about dignity, about teaching my son a lesson he would never forget. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Families lined up, eager, buzzing with excitement. My wife squeezed my hand, torn between duty and devastation. My daughter clung to me, begging quietly, "Dad, please come with us, please." But the choice had already been made for me. My son had decided, and his decision carried the weight of finality. They walked away, one by one, blending into the sea of passengers. My wife turned back 3 times, her eyes pleading with me, but she couldn't stop the inevitable. And then it was just me, alone, sitting in a chair that felt colder than stone, surrounded by laughter and joy that didn't belong to me. I should have cried. I should have broken down right there in the middle of the airport, but I didn't. Instead, I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, staring straight ahead, because something inside me had shifted. In that hollow silence, I realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was war. My son had made a choice, and choices have consequences. He thought he was clever, powerful even, for pushing me aside. But he didn't understand the fire he had lit. I replayed every word, every sneer, every dismissal. I etched them into my mind, branding them deep into my memory. I wanted to feel the sting again and again, until it became fuel. People passed me by, some glancing with pity, others not noticing at all. None of them knew what had just happened, what was brewing beneath my calm exterior. They saw an old man left behind, but they didn't see the storm forming behind his eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my son, just 2 words. "Enjoy. Home?" I stared at it for a long moment, then laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that startled even me. He thought this was over. He thought he had won. But he didn't realize something important. When you strip a man of everything. The ride home from the airport felt like the longest drive of my life. The cab's engine hummed, the city lights blurred outside the window, but my mind wasn't in that car. It was trapped in a loop, my son's smirk, his words, The text he had sent me, "Enjoy home." I gripped the handle of my suitcase so tight my knuckles turned white. Enjoy home? That single phrase played over and over until it stopped being a message and became a challenge. A declaration of war. By the time I walked through my front door, the house felt alien, empty, silent. For years, this place had been alive with voices, arguments, laughter, the chaos of a family. Now, it was just four walls and shadows. I dropped my bag by the couch and sat in the dark, listening to the clock tick. Each tick sounded like a countdown. Sleep didn't come that night. Instead, I pulled out old photo albums. My son's first steps, his school plays, his graduations, the smile on his face every Christmas morning. I flipped through them slowly, each page cutting me deeper. This wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. He had erased me from his life, like I was disposable. And yet, as I stared at those smiling photographs, something hardened inside me. If he thought he could write me out of the story, he was wrong. He had underestimated the man who built the foundation he stood on. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. My hands shook, but my mind was clear. I wrote one word at the top of the page: revenge, not blind rage, not a tantrum, no. This would be methodical, precise, a lesson so sharp it would cut deeper than anything he had done to me. I began mapping out his life, his weaknesses, his dependencies. My son thought he was independent, but I knew the truth. He leaned on me more than he realized. I had co-signed his car loan, helped him with rent when he was short. I even gave him money for that phone he had used to send me the text that gutted me. Every thread in his life I had woven, and now, one by one, I would pull them out. But revenge isn't about speed. It's about patience, about building the tension until the other person doesn't even realize the walls are closing in. I took a sip of coffee, staring at the word I had written, and for the first time since the airport, I felt something close to peace. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was only the beginning. The first step was simple: information. You can't strike where it hurts until you know where the weak spots are. I started with his finances. A quick call to the bank confirmed what I already suspected. His car loan was still tied to my name, my credit, my guarantee. Without me, that shiny vehicle he loved so much would vanish in a matter of weeks. Then there was his apartment. Half the deposit had come from me, and the rent. He had been late 3 times last year, and it was my quiet transfers that kept him from being evicted. He thought he was independent, but really he was standing on stilts I had built for him. All I had to do was step back, and those stilts would crumble. I didn't move yet, though. Not right away. Patience. That was the key. A lesson delivered too quickly loses its weight. Instead, I began to watch. I followed his social media, his constant bragging about the trip, the photos with palm trees and cocktails, the fake smile plastered across his face. Every "living the dream" caption was another log on the fire burning inside me. But I didn't comment. I didn't call. I stayed silent, because silence is louder than any word when it's unexpected. Meanwhile, I started planning the strike. That would hurt not just his wallet, but his pride. Because people like my son, people who thrive on arrogance, don't fear losing money. They fear losing status, image, control, and that was where I would aim. I drafted letters, carefully worded, professional-looking letters, to his employer, to his landlord, to the bank. Each one was a seed planted in the soil of his life, ready to sprout at the exact moment I chose. At night I walked through the empty house, rehearsing conversations that hadn't happened yet. My voice grew steadier, my resolve sharper. Every plan, every step made me feel less like the man abandoned at an airport and more like the man pulling strings behind the curtain. And through it all, I thought of his words. "You don't fit in with us anymore." He was right. I didn't fit in. Not with his shallow world of selfies and bragging rights. Not with his delusion of superiority. I wasn't part of his us. But soon, he'd understand something crucial. Without me, there was no him. Days turned into weeks. The silence between us stretched wider and wider, but my son didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he thought I had accepted my place in the shadows. His social media was filled with pictures of luau's, beaches, waterfalls. He posed with strangers. Toasted with drinks I knew he couldn't afford, captioning each shot with smug words. Best trip ever. No stress, no baggage. That last phrase hit me hardest. No baggage, I wasn't baggage, I was the foundation. But if he wanted to see what life without me looked like, I would give him the unfiltered version. I began with the car, quietly, methodically. I called the bank and withdrew my co-signer status. They warned me it would trigger an immediate review of his loan. Perfect. Within 2 weeks, a letter would land in his mailbox, and when it did, the car he flaunted on every Instagram story would suddenly be on the edge of repossession. Next, his apartment. I contacted the landlord, explaining calmly, politely, that I would no longer be responsible for covering his late payments. He's an adult now, I said, almost smiling as the words left my mouth. He should handle it himself. The landlord agreed, though his tone carried doubt about my son's reliability. That was another thread cut. I didn't stop there. His job was the crown jewel of his pride. He loved bragging about how indispensable he was, how his boss trusted him with everything. What he didn't know was that his boss had once asked me for advice. After all, I had worked in the same industry for decades before retirement. A casual lunch with that boss was all it took. I didn't sabotage him outright, no, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I simply let slip a few truths about his attitude, about how quickly he dismissed people, even family, about the way he had abandoned me. Just be careful with him, I said, my voice calm but deliberate. He's not as reliable as he wants you to think. The seed was planted. It would grow on its own. Every move I made was subtle, invisible to him at first. He was still on vacation, still drunk on the illusion of freedom. But illusions have an expiration date. And as I prepared each step, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been at the airport. This wasn't rage, it was justice, finely sharpened. I wasn't the man left behind. I was the man waiting in the shadows, holding the strings of his downfall. And soon, when he returned from his paradise, he would find that paradise had rotted from the inside out. The day of their return finally arrived. I knew the exact flight, the exact time. I didn't go to greet them at the airport. No, those days were over. Instead, I waited at home, calm, collected, watching the clock tick closer to the moment when my carefully planted seeds would begin to sprout. When the door finally opened, my wife stepped inside first, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. My daughter followed, dragging her suitcase. And then came my son, sunburned, smug, phone in hand, laughing at some joke he'd just texted. He looked at me like I was furniture, like I was invisible. That smirk, the same one from the airport, still curled his lips. "See?" he said, tossing his bag onto the floor. "Told you it was better this way. We had an amazing time. No drama, no whining, just perfect." My wife shot him a glare, but he ignored it. He looked at me as if daring me to respond. For a moment I just smiled, a small, knowing smile that made his brows knit in confusion. "What's so funny?" he snapped. "Nothing," I said softly. "Just welcome home." He rolled his eyes and stormed off to his room, slamming the door shut. I sat back, waiting. It wouldn't take long now. The first crack appeared 2 days later. A letter in the mail, bright red letters across the top. Delinquent notice. His car loan was under review. Unless he made a massive payment in the next 10 days, repossession was imminent. He read it at the kitchen table, face draining of color. This has to be a mistake," he muttered. My wife and daughter watched silently. I sipped my coffee. The second blow landed 3 days after that. His landlord called. Rent was overdue again. Without my quiet transfers, there was no safety net. The threat of eviction hung in the air. His arrogance began to crumble. I saw it in his posture, in the way he snapped at everyone, in the panic flickering behind his eyes, and then came the final strike, the one I had been waiting for. His boss called him into the office. The whispers I had planted had done their work. Doubt had taken root. When he came home that evening, his face was pale, his hands shaking. They cut my hours, he said, voice breaking. Said they don't trust my focus. I might lose the job if things don't change. He looked at me then, not with arrogance, not with smugness, but with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. And in that moment I felt it, the balance shifting, the scales tipping back where they belonged, but I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I simply placed my hand on the table and leaned forward. Actions, I whispered, have consequences. His eyes widened. He knew. He didn't have proof, but he knew. And that knowledge terrified him more than any word I could say. For, the first time since the airport, the power was mine again. And this was only the beginning. The silence in our house was different now. No longer the silence of betrayal, but the silence before a storm. My son avoided me, creeping around like a shadow. Gone was the cocky voice, the arrogant laugh, the smirk that haunted me at the airport. Now he carried himself with tension, shoulders tight, eyes darting like a cornered animal. It was working. Every move I had made was tightening the noose, and he felt it. One evening I found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by overdue bills. His hands shook as he punched numbers into a calculator. His phone buzzed, probably his friends from the trip, posting more pictures, living carefree, but he ignored it. He looked small. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice calm even. He flinched. His pride wouldn't let him ask for help, not yet. "I'll figure it out," he muttered, though the crack in his voice betrayed him. I simply nodded and walked away, but inside I felt the balance shift further. He was learning, though not fast enough. The next day his car was gone, repossessed. He came home furious, shouting, slamming doors, blaming everyone but himself. My wife scolded. My daughter hid in her room, and I sat silently, sipping my coffee. When his rage finally burned out, he collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. That was the first time I saw tears in his eyes since he was a boy. But I didn't move to comfort him. I didn't offer reassurance. He had stripped me of dignity at the airport. Now he would taste the same emptiness. Days later, the eviction notice arrived. 30 days to vacate. He stormed into the living room, waving the paper like a weapon. "You knew this would happen. You let this happen." I looked at him, steady, unflinching. "No," I said. "You made this happen." The words hit harder than any scream. He froze, the paper trembling in his hand. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. My wife's eyes darted between us, full of conflict. My daughter watched quietly, as if realizing a shift in power she hadn't seen before. And me? I felt no joy, no triumph, just cold, necessary justice, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about teaching him a lesson he could never forget. And soon the final blow would land, the one that would shatter the last of his pride. The cracks in his life widened with every passing day. He stopped posting on social media. The endless stream of living the dream photos vanished, replaced by silence. His friends, those same friends he bragged to, began to drift away. Without the car, without the money, without the illusion of success, he had nothing to flaunt. And without something to flaunt, they lost interest. But the real collapse came at work. One afternoon, he stormed into the house, tie loose, face pale. He threw his briefcase across the room and collapsed into a chair. My wife rushed to him, worried. But I stayed where I was, sipping my tea. "They cut my hours again," he said, voice hollow. "Said I'm not focused, not reliable. They don't think I take responsibility seriously." The irony almost made me laugh. Responsibility, something I had carried on my shoulders for decades, something I had tried to teach him, was finally the very thing he was being judged for. "What are you going to do?" my wife asked softly. He rubbed his face, groaning. "I don't know. I can't pay rent, I can't pay bills, I'm drowning here." His eyes flicked to me, desperate, searching for a lifeline. For years I had been that lifeline, but not this time. I leaned forward, locking my gaze with his. "Son, every decision you've made has led you here. You wanted freedom, you wanted me out of the way. Well, now you have it." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. He wanted to argue, to lash out like before, but there was nothing left to hide behind. No car, no apartment security, no job stability. Only the consequences of his arrogance. That night, I heard him pacing in his room, muttering to himself, panicked. The walls of his pride were crumbling, and I let them. Because some lessons can't be taught with words, they have to be lived painfully until they scar deep enough to never be forgotten. A week later, the final letter came. Not from the bank, not from the landlord, but from his boss. Effective. Immediately termination of employment. He sat at the table again, letter in trembling hands. My wife was on the verge of tears, my daughter silent. He looked up at me, eyes red, lips quivering, and whispered, "Dad, I need help." The words I had been waiting for. The words that tasted like justice. But help wouldn't come easy. Not. Now, because before I lifted him back up, he would need to understand what it felt like to throw someone down. The night he lost his job, the house was suffocatingly quiet. My wife sat beside him, rubbing his shoulder as he stared at the termination letter, broken. My daughter peeked from the hallway, her eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. And me. I stood at the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching. He finally looked up, eyes bloodshot, voice cracked. "Dad, please, I don't know what to do. I need you." There it was. The same boy who once looked at me with contempt at the airport, now stripped of his arrogance, begging for help. I should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction, but what I felt was something colder. "Vindication, you remember the airport?" I asked softly. He froze, his lips parting but no words coming out. "You told me I didn't belong, that I was baggage, that you'd be better off without me." I leaned closer, my voice a whisper, sharp enough to cut. "Well, how's life without me now?" His head dropped. Tears hit the paper in his hands. My wife shot me a warning look, her voice trembling. "Enough. He's your son." "Yes," I said firmly, never taking my eyes off him. "And that's exactly why he needs to understand this. If he doesn't feel the weight of his actions now, he never will." For days, he spiraled. No money, no friends, no job. He sold his phone, his TV, even his watch just to scrape by. He stopped leaving the house, too ashamed to face the world he had once flaunted himself in. And then came the final crack, the blow to his reputation. Word had spread. His boss had told others in the industry, and soon his name carried a shadow. Calls for new jobs went unanswered. Opportunities slipped away. The doors he once walked through so confidently were now slammed shut. One evening, I found him outside on the porch, staring into the night. His shoulders sagged, his face hollow. He looked up at me, no anger, no defiance left, only desperation. "Dad," he whispered, "I was wrong. About everything. About you. About the trip, about me." I stayed silent, letting his words hang heavy in the air. He wiped his face, trembling. "I thought I didn't need you. I thought I was better. But I see it now. I was nothing without you." Finally, the confession. The collapse of every wall he had built between us. I sat beside him, slowly, deliberately. "Do you mean that?" He nodded, tears streaming freely. "Yes, I'll do anything to fix this. Just don't give up on me." For the first time, I felt the coldness in me soften, but only slightly, because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And before he could earn a second chance, he needed one final lesson, a lesson that would brand itself into his memory forever. I sat there on the porch with him, the night air heavy with silence. His tears glistened under the dim porch light, his face pale and broken. For the first time in years, he wasn't my arrogant son, or the selfish man who left me behind. He was just a boy, lost, desperate, clinging to the hope that I might still care. "I'll do anything," he whispered again, voice shaking. "Just help me, please." I let the words hang there, cold and sharp. Then slowly I stood. "You want help? Then you'll start by learning what it feels like to give everything and get nothing back." He looked up at me, confused, fear flashing in his eyes. "At the airport," I continued, my voice steady, "you stripped me of my dignity. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You called me baggage. You told me I didn't belong. Now you know what it feels like to be discarded, to have the ground pulled out from under you." He swallowed hard, trembling. I know, I was wrong, I was stupid. Please, Dad, I can't do this without you. For the first time I leaned closer, close enough for him to see the fire still burning in my eyes. Good, because now you'll never forget it. Every time you struggle, every time you doubt yourself, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember the day you broke your father, and the day your father taught you what consequences feel like. He broke down completely, sobbing, hands covering his face. My wife stepped into the doorway, tears in her eyes, torn between anger at me and pity for him. My daughter stood behind her, silent, watching, learning, and me. I turned away, walking back into the house. I didn't comfort him. I didn't lift him up, not yet, because true lessons don't end with forgiveness. They end with scars, and I wanted this scar to run deep enough that he would carry it for the rest of his life. Inside, I sat at the table, staring at the same word I had written weeks ago on my notepad, revenge. I crossed it out slowly, replaced it with another word, respect. Because now, he knew. He finally understood. The next morning I offered him a path forward. Not money, not easy solutions, but work. Hard, grueling work to rebuild everything he had lost. If he wanted my support again, he would earn it the way I once had, through sweat, through humility, through sacrifice. And as he nodded, broken but determined, I felt the storm inside me finally calm, not because I had destroyed him, but because I had forced him to face himself. The son who left me behind in Hawaii no longer existed. In his place stood a man who finally knew what it meant to lose and what it would take to rebuild, and that, I realized, was the most devastating revenge of all.